wealth of a nation is in the well-being of its people, both spiritually and materialistically. It's not a question of lowering our standards, but of helping others to raise theirs. If all people everywhere could be content and their living standards even and compatible with ours, there would be no envy in the world, and therefore less provocation of war. When you encourage and help people to develop their own natural resources, you do more than put bread in their mouths. You put dignity in their hearts.
Perhaps there's someone right here on this train who could help us. He seems interested. Excuse me.
What's all that foreign stuff doing here? Those United Nations people moving in?
You don't approve of the United Nations, sir?
Too many foreigners. We got no business getting mixed up with them. Have we now?
For 10 years after the First World War, as today, there was a great demand for our products all over the world. This scramble for world markets resulted in some pretty short-sighted thinking. For instance, some people reasoned that all we had to do was to get our products onto ships bound for foreign ports, and prosperity was guaranteed. They forgot that a lot of this business was done on credit. We wanted our pay in dollars, and the only way the other fellow could get dollars was to sell us something or to send us gold. From our point of view, everything was rosy. But from the other fellow's point of view, things looked entirely different. Because our tariff made it difficult to send us goods, other nations had to ship us gold.
Gold? What's the matter with gold?
Why, nothing, so long as it keeps moving. But in return for our goods, we were getting more gold than we could possibly use. In fact, we ended up with 2/3 of the world's monetary supply.
Some guys dug this out of a hole in the ground in Africa, and now we're putting it back in a hole in Kentucky. I don't get it.
That's just it. Nobody really got it. Only the countries that had gold could buy freely from us. The others had to take their goods elsewhere. Foreign trade dried up, and this accentuated the worldwide depression.
Now look here. Don't blame our depression on lack of foreign trade. It couldn't have been that important. Everybody knows that our foreign trade has always amounted to less than 10% of our total business. If you ask my friend Paul Hoffman, I bet you he'll back me up.
No, J.B., I'm afraid you're wrong. The crippling of foreign trade was not the only factor in the Depression, but it was an important one. As for that 10%, that's an overall figure. In many industries, ours, for example, the figure has run much higher. And that extra production for export is a very vital factor. It not only means more jobs in plants like ours, but it also means lower costs or lower prices for the home market as well as the export market.
Remove that coffee. It's from Brazil, and the gentleman doesn't approve of foreign products. And that cigar, sir, it was made in Havana. Surely you aren't going to smoke that. What's this? A silk necktie? Away with it. Are you aware that the works in that handsome watch on your wrist came from Switzerland? And your suit, sir, I understand your embarrassment, but off with it.
Hello there and welcome to today's show. Over the past few months we have seen many companies all around the world pack their bags and move overseas to find a cheaper place to work. In April 2005, British car maker MG Rover went into administration. On the 18th of April 2006, European car maker Peugeot announced the closure of the Ryton manufacturing plant in Britain, resulting in the loss of up to 5,000 jobs. On the 17th of May 2006, another British car maker, Vauxhall, owned by the General Motors Group, announced that they would be cutting 900 jobs. At the time, General Motors also cut 30,000 jobs in the United States. Then in early June of 2006, British cycle maker Falcon, which is based in Brigg, North Lincolnshire, reported losses of £2 million and decided to move their production overseas. Falcon Cycles, which is owned by the Tandem Group, also manufactures cycles under the Claude Butler and British Eagle brand names.
They're working on the lower end of the economic ladder. It tends to be raw materials, agriculture, basic stuff that feeds into the local economy. But all over the world, there are also slaves making things that feed into the world economy.
Things like cocoa. Half the world's cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast. Many cocoa farms there use slaves, which means that some of the chocolate we eat comes from slave labor.
In the old days, slaves were expensive. Today, they're cheap. There's a glut of slaves, and when you use them, you throw them away if you don't want them anymore. They're disposable.
Slaves like these men cost the equivalent of $40,000 in the Deep South during the 1850s. Today, the average slave cost $90.
When people eat chocolate, they're eating my flesh.
So people watching this may think, well, why don't we just stop buying chocolate? But I have to tell you, that can actually make things worse. We have to make it clear to the multinationals that slavery is too high a price to pay for cheap goods.
How then did we get to this situation where we've got 27 million people in slavery in 2005? Three things supported this change, three factors. They're not causes, they're factors that supported it. The first factor is one that you guys all know about, the population explosion. Right? Everybody knows, right, that the world used to have 2 billion people about 50 years ago, and now it's got 6 billion people. Right? That we've gone from 2 billion people to 6 billion people in about 45, 50 years. And that most of that growth has occurred in the developing world, in the global south. That growth has been one of the greatest, most profound events in the history of humankind. Never before has this globe been completely glutted with human beings. That doesn't make people slaves. That does not make people slaves. But add into it a second factor, and the second factor is globalization. The key point here is that all kinds of things have happened in the last 50 years to make that very large number of people in the developing world, in the global south, very poor. You know, it used to be about subsistence agriculture, people growing their own food. Now those people have been pushed off the land. This is a story that repeats itself all over the developing world. Pushed off the land into the cities because they're shifting the economies of the countries to cash crops so that we can go to Starbucks and stuff like that. But cash crops to pay back international debts that their dictators have taken out from the World Bank and so forth to buy guns to oppress the people and drive them off their land. It's a big circle like this. The point of it is that the impoverishing impact has meant that incredibly large numbers of people have been pushed into the mega cities of the global south and find themselves there in situations of extreme vulnerability.
Futuros para que ustedes se pongan estas gorras. Hello, my name is Kenya. I come from the Dominican Republic, and I come here so that you may know that we are sacrificing our life so that you can wear these hats.
And of course, this is very uncomfortable for these companies because even though they are the engines of globalization, they don't really believe in globalization, not this kind of globalization, right? I mean, their whole system depends on the world of production and the world of consumption staying safely apart, and there not being this connection at the grassroots where we learn the secrets behind our shiny, perfect, airbrushed global world. So now these brands have become, in many ways, the most visible targets of globalization, so much so that whenever you see a protest, during a protest, there'll be a line of riot cops guarding the Starbucks, guarding the Gap, guarding the McDonald's. And this strikes me as tremendously symbolic, somehow, that they're guarding the facade, the entry point into the world of globalization. And what this activism is doing is it's putting them together. And it's going to the shiny facade of the brand outside the mall, outside the superstore, and saying, we know how your products are produced. That's what these campaigns do. They make globalization real. They say it's about the food that you eat, it's about the clothes that you wear, it's about the toys you buy your kids. I'm often asked, so what do we buy? How can we shop ethically in this context? And the truth is that it's very, very hard to do. You can't go to the average mall and go to the ethical section and buy products that you know are produced under ethical conditions. The truth is that there is no way to change the world through shopping, but you can actually work on a few different levels at once. You can work as an individual by supporting businesses that are making an effort to produce their goods under ethical conditions. You can also buy in bulk as a school in ways that have a positive effect on an industry. But I think more importantly than that, I think that you can be part of this global movement that is really about creating more ethical conditions of trade, fair trade as opposed to simply free trade. So if you keep following the logo still further, you end up inevitably on the doorsteps of the World Trade Organization, at the World Bank, at the International Monetary Fund. You end up on the doorsteps of the institutions that are writing the rules of global trade. What these institutions believe, people at the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, what they honestly believe is that what's good for business, what's good for large corporations, will be good for all of us eventually. So that when we write the rules for trade, we should write rules that are in the interests of these large corporations. Because if we do that, if we make the conditions good enough for them, then eventually we will all reap the benefits in terms of jobs, even in terms of the environment. What we're hearing most forcefully on the streets is not an anti-trade message or an anti-globalization message, but a rejection of the logic that what's good for corporations will be good for everyone, and that we should take a spectatorship approach to our own democracies, that we should just watch and wait. Part of what we're starting to see at these huge protests outside of trade meetings, like Seattle, Washington, Prague, Genoa, every time world leaders get together to talk about the global economy, there are these counter-demonstrations. And what is being articulated is the beginnings of a movement that is about reclaiming the public, reclaiming the commons. And that's a really difficult thing to do because, of course, so much of our lives has been privatized and is now within the umbrella of the market, that even talking about the commons is like trying to talk about the matrix while you're in the matrix. So we're seeing more and more direct action. I think that there's a new impatience out there, that people aren't waiting to be granted rights that are already ours, that are already enshrined in law. And if the market isn't providing in the much promised trickle-down, if it isn't providing for people, then people have to take action in order to meet their basic needs, and in fact have a right to. And even if they face repression from the police in so doing, they are behaving ethically, and they are behaving as citizens. And that's where the debate about globalization really is at. It's not about saying I'm for or against trade, or I'm for or against this institution. It's about democracy. It's about people's rights to be authors of their own destiny, to control and have a say in controlling our shared public resources.
We're global people now, and we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to live in a world with slaves? Because if we don't take action to actually end the slavery in the world, if we kind of give up, all we're doing then is really letting other people jerk the strings that tie us to slavery around the world.